Hey guys, it's Miss Hazel, and we are going to do our exploration so that on Friday we can do an experiment. All right, so our question right now is, why are bees important? Why are bees important? I want you to think about that question. And if you need to pause this video, if I move too quickly and you want more time to think, you can always hit the pause button.
Mind what this part of the plant is. Inside of a seed pod are the plant's seeds, and the seeds of any plant are just like babies. They're plant babies. It
Aw,
sounds funny to say it that way. We don't often put the word plant
look
and
at them.
baby next to each other. But seeds really are plant babies. Once the seeds are planted, they'll grow up into adult plants. So again, your vanilla plants, they grew well and they grew flowers. But as you learned, the flowers are supposed to eventually shrivel up and become vanilla seed pods.
Interesting. So when this plant grows, it's supposed to shrivel up and become a pod. Huh, that's unique.
That never happened. Watching the video of vanilla plants in the wild, you were reminded that bees are somehow important. In the wild, flowers bloom. Bees are attracted to them, and eventually the flowers turn into seed pods. It's almost as if the bees perform some kind of magic on the flower, and that turns the flower into seed pods. What is it that bees do? Well, notice how it's the center of a flower that the bee is interested in. It crawls down in there. That bee is in there for a few seconds, and then it comes back up and flies away. When a bee does this, it comes out all covered in this yellow powder. Do you see that?
Oh yeah, look at that. Wow.
This yellow powder is what we call pollen. Notice that the reason the bees are getting covered in pollen is because as they climb down onto the center part of the flower has all these pollen dusters surrounding the center. You see the yellow pollen at the tops? The bees bump into those pollen dusters in order to get to where they're going. So the bees wind up getting really coated in pollen. There's a second part of the flower center to notice, and that's this thing right here in the middle, sticking up above the pollen dusters. It's this knob-like thing. Now, if you touch the end of this knob, you'll feel that it's sticky. It doesn't matter what kind of flower you have. If you look at the middle of any flower, there's always a knob-like thing that's poking above the pollen dusters, and it feels very sticky to the touch. Scientists call this sticky knob the stigma. It might be helpful for us to remember it as the sticky stigma.
Right, see? Sticky stigma.
So as bees are flying in and out of a flower, not only are they getting covered in pollen from the pollen dusters, but they're occasionally bumping into the sticky stigma. And so some of that pollen gets stuck to the stigma. Scientists noticed all this and wondered if maybe that's the reason that flowers will drop their petals and then a seed pod will begin to form. Is there something important about pollen getting stuck to the sticky stigma? One scientist got curious and did an experiment in a greenhouse, taking some pollen from one flower and going around and dusting the sticky stigmas himself, instead of having bees do it. Sure enough, now the flowers dropped their petals and seed pods grew. So in order for seed pods to grow, there's an important process involved. The sticky stigma in the center of the flower needs to get pollen on it. This process of pollen needing to get on the sticky stigma in order for seeds to form, scientists named it pollination.
So this sticky stigma needs pollen on it. So because it has to get pollen on it, they call it pollination.
Take a moment now. See if you can spot these two important flower parts, the pollen dusters and the sticky stigma, on some different kinds of flowers, like flowers you might find where you live.
Ooh, let's see. Can you find the pollen dusters and stigma of this flower? Let's see. How about our next one? And again, if I'm going too fast, you can always pause it. I just have to make sure that the video isn't too long so that it works on the Flipgrid. And all right. Now that we know that the stigma needs pollen on it, the sticky stigma needs pollen on it, in order for seed pods to grow, what could you do in your greenhouse? So a greenhouse is a place where you have like a garden indoors. Now that you know stigma needs pollen, what could you do to make sure that the seed pod would grow?
So after learning all this, you go ahead and try to pollinate your vanilla plant flowers yourself using a toothpick. You carefully take some of the pollen from the pollen dusters and move it over to the sticky stigma. As you're doing this, you think, this is a little crazy that plants can't do this by themselves. All they need is for some of the pollen from the pollen dusters to get onto the sticky stigma. It's so close. But whatever, if this is what it takes to make vanilla beans, if you have to do this with a toothpick, you gotta do it. So you do this. You wait a few weeks, and when you go back to check the plants, still nothing. The flowers still aren't turning into seed pods. It didn't work. What is going on here? Did you do something wrong? Didn't the scientists put pollen onto the sticky stigma and it worked? What's missing? Let's watch a video of bees landing on flowers again. But this time, watch a little more carefully. See if the bees are doing anything different from what you were doing.
What are you seeing going on here? What do you see the bees doing? Does this give you an idea of what we could try next instead? So picking up the pollen with the toothpick and putting it on the sticky stigma didn't work, but a bee doing this does work. It does get the pollen on the stigma. So what do you think we could do next? Okay, so we know that the stigma needs pollen, and we're going to continue to try and solve this problem tomorrow. So what I want you to do on your Flipgrid video is I want you to answer this question. What is something that you might try so that you can get the pollen onto the sticky stigma here? Okay, what is something you could do to get the pollen onto the stigma? Okay, get to work, scientists.